Washington is ready to negotiate with Ukraine about using U.S. weapons to attack Russian territory. Ukrainian leaders disagree about the Kharkov situation. Poland is considering using its air defense system to shoot down Russian missiles in Ukrainian airspace. Washington is ready to negotiate with Ukraine about using U.S. weapons to attack Russian territory. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the House Foreign Affairs Committee that he is ready to discuss with Ukraine the possibility of using U.S. weapons to attack targets deep inside Russian territory. According to TASS news agency on May 23, responding to comments that the U.S. should send a clearer signal to Ukraine that the country can carry out retaliatory attacks on Russian territory with U.S. weapons, Mr. Blinken said. "We have worked hard to make sure Ukraine has what it needs, when it needs it, to make sure it can effectively use it, can effectively maintain its weapons. We are always ready to listen," said the statement. Ukrainian partners. Secretary Blinken added, "We are determined to ensure that Ukraine not only has what it needs to defend itself, but obviously we have to constantly review what those needs are at any given time." Previously, on May 21, Politico newspaper quoted a letter from bipartisan lawmakers in the U.S. House of Representatives asking President Joe Biden's administration to allow Ukraine to attack Russian territory with American weapons. The letter calls on U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to authorize the use of U.S.-supplied weapons to attack strategic targets on Russian territory under certain circumstances. Commenting on this information, Russian President spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that figures in the U.S. Congress seem determined to incite more tension around Ukraine. Previously, Politico reported that Ukrainian officials were trying to ask the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden to lift the ban on using U.S.-made weapons to attack inside Russia. Specifically, Ukrainian officials said that this policy made it impossible for them to attack Russian positions as Russian troops prepared for a major march to Kharkov. For weeks, Ukrainian officials have watched as Russian soldiers have gathered near the Ukrainian border, unable to use U.S.-supplied weapons for preemptive strikes. According to the conditions of sending long-range weapons to Ukraine, the U.S. prohibits Ukraine from using these weapons to attack inside Russian territory. Mr. David Arakhamia, chairman of the ruling Sluha Narodu party in the Ukrainian parliament, said during his visit to the U.S. on May 14, "The main problem today is the White House policy that limits our ability to attack military targets inside Russia." Ukrainian leaders disagree about the Kharkov situation. The Ukrainian units responsible for border defense did not even have time to react before being separated and surrounded by Russian shock troops. Russia's surprise attack on Kharkov. On the morning of May 10, Moscow forces used only 4 infantry battalions, under fire support from the Air Force and artillery. The so-called Northern Defense Line in Kharkov was quickly breached, and within 48 hours they took control of 13 Ukrainian border villages and towns with an area of about 170 square kilometers. The Ukrainian units responsible for border defense did not even have time to react before being separated and surrounded by the Russian assault group. No matter from any angle, Ukraine's defense line protecting Kharkov was clearly unprepared and inadequate. The rapid fall of Kiev forces is quite surprising because at the end of last year, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that the Russian Ministry of Defense was establishing the Northern Battle Group in the west of the country to prepare for the fall of Kiev forces. Large-scale offensive operations in northern Ukraine. It is clear that the Ukrainian leader predicted the situation, but it is unclear why the work of strengthening defense in the Kharkov area received little attention. The main purpose of Russia's offensive campaign is to establish a buffer zone with a depth of about 10 to 15 kilometers and a width of about 300 to 400 kilometers, to prevent Ukraine from having the opportunity to organize shelling into Russian territory. In fact, in the early morning of May 10, when infantry detachments of the Northern Battle Group crossed the border and entered Kharkov from 2 directions, Ukraine was completely surprised and unable to react. There is information that the foreign mercenary unit responsible for protecting important fortifications on the Ukrainian border has chosen to turn and run. Meanwhile, the Kyiv Forces Territorial Defense Brigade in the rear, with poor equipment and limited combat capabilities, was severely damaged by the Russian assault force. According to battlefield information provided from the Ukrainian side, Russia's attack force mainly consists of battalion-level combat units, BTG, including wheeled armored vehicles and light infantry units, aimed at increasing flexibility to penetrate deep into defense lines. Russian thrusts divided the force into groups of 50 with reinforced platoon-sized formations, and in just 48 hours, they took out 13 villages one by one, causing Ukraine's border defenses to instantly collapse. I.e. As of early morning on May 12, the Russian army entered the city of Volchansk and fought with the enemy on the streets. What is puzzling is that half a year ago, Ukrainian intelligence determined that the enemy was likely to launch a full-scale attack in the direction of Kharkov. However, when Moscow actually mobilized, Kyiv had no defenders, and Moscow's forces did not even encounter minefields, large clusters of fortifications, or trenches that could stop their advance. Ukrainian leaders disagree about the situation in Kharkov. Assessing the failure, Kyiv's senior leaders do not have a unified understanding of how the Russian army opened a second battlefield in Kharkov. And they still have not determined Moscow's true intentions. Some Ukrainian generals believe that the Russian army's attack towards Kharkov is mainly a diversionary attack. This is Moscow's own phased strategy, aimed at using attack instead of defense. According to the judgment of Ukrainian leaders, the purpose of Russia's attack on Kharkov is to restrain and force Kyiv to withdraw troops from other fronts to reinforce Kharkov, which makes them not strong enough in other directions. However, some other senior Ukrainian military officials suspect that Russia launched the attack in the Kharkov direction with a small force, mainly to test the reaction of the defense line. If the defense capabilities of Kyiv forces are weak, Moscow will immediately switch to a full-scale attack. Based on reports from French and Russian media, it can now be confirmed that the total force of Russia's northern battle group entering Ukraine does not exceed 2,000 troops. They mainly include the following 4 units. The first force was from the 245th Mechanized Infantry Regiment of the 2nd Army's 3rd Mechanized Infantry Division. The second unit is the 2nd Special Operations Brigade under the Russian intelligence agency GRU. Poland is considering using its air defense system to shot down a Russian missile over Ukrainian airspace. Poland announced that it is considering using its air defense system to shoot Moscow missiles flying over Ukrainian airspace. Polish Foreign Ministry spokesman Paweł Wronski said the plan to shoot down Russian missiles over Ukraine using Warsaw's air defense system is being considered, but the NATO country has not made any specific decisions. This, Poland shooting down a Russian missile, is being considered from a legal and technical point of view, but no decision has been made on this issue, official Wronski told Ukrinform news agency. He also rejected the plan to bring Polish air defense systems to Ukraine. It is impossible for Poland's air defense system to be located outside the country's borders, the diplomat emphasized. On May 20, in an interview with Reuters, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on neighboring NATO member countries to shoot down Russian targets in Ukrainian airspace. A day later, Mr. Zelensky continued to ask NATO member countries to shoot down Russian missiles over Ukraine and said that this move could not be considered war with Russia. What's the problem here? Why can't we shoot down those missiles? Is it defense? Yes. Is it an attack on Russia? No. You're shooting down Machine's Russian plane and shot down a Russian pilot? No. So is there any problem? Mr. Zelensky said. In recent times, some politicians in NATO countries have called on the alliance to shoot down Russian missiles and UAVs over Ukrainian airspace. However, no decision on this has yet been made. Earlier this month, a number of German lawmakers from both the ruling party and the opposition supported the idea of NATO helping protect western Ukraine's airspace from attacks from Russia. Interception of Russian missiles and UAVs will be carried out from NATO territory, the parliamentarians emphasized. In March, Polish Deputy Foreign Minister Andrzej Sejna said that NATO was considering shooting down any Russian missiles near member countries' borders.